Hello everyone, my name is Udita Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology, the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, Bhopal. In the previous module, we had discussed topics regarding health, illness, well-being and the illness and wellness continuum. Taking that discussion further, today we'll be studying the biopsychosocial model of health and illness. Let's begin with the topic. In today's discussion, we'll first understand what exactly does a model of health mean. What does the term model of health signifies? Then we'll go through a basic introduction of the biopsychosocial model of health, which would be followed by a closer look at the individual components of the module. The individual components being the biological determinants, the psychological determinants and the social determinants of health. Lastly, we would take a look at how the biopsychosocial model gave important insights for the field of health and wellness. What were the new innovations provided by this module? Let us now try to understand what exactly does a model of health and illness mean. A model of health basically refers to a framework or ways of understanding and conceptualizing health and illness. When we say framework or ways of understanding, a model of health and illness basically provides us with a blueprint or a structure of how to understand and approach any illness and the course of its treatment. So, the different models of health, they provide you with different perspectives of what is health, what is illness and how can we cure that particular illness or how can we prevent from getting that particular illness. Apart from that, each of these model of health or illness, each of these model of health and illness differs on the basis of the assumptions they hold, on the basis of what exactly do they believe is the cause of a particular illness, what exactly do they believe is the cause of a person healing back from that illness. So, what makes a person more prone to a particular illness and the other one less prone to a particular illness, and then how to approach that particular thing is what a model of health guides us about. So, the underlying assumptions, the factors contributing to your health, the best strategies with which you can bounce back from that adversity, things of that sort. There are several different kinds of models of health and illness. One of them can be your biological or biomedical model of health. The biomedical model is the traditional and ancient model of health, which says that only physical health and physical signs and symptoms, physical parameters should be taken into consideration when we talk about health and illness. Today, we will be focusing on one of the most important models of health which emerges out of the biomedical model that I just mentioned, the biopsychosocial model. The biopsychosocial model emerges out of the biomedical model and it can be understood as an elaboration of the same or as a model that has risen out of the criticisms of the biomedical model, because the biomedical model was only limited on the physical aspects of health and illness, only focusing on whether the person has a certain illness, does the person has physical symptoms to it, symptomatic treatment, specific to the point treatment. But as a result of these criticisms that the biomedical approach was very reductionist, it was very restrictive in its nature, we now use the biopsychosocial model, which is currently one of the most widely and popularly used models. Let us begin with our journey of biopsychosocial model. So, this is what a diagrammatic representation of the biopsychosocial model looks like. It talks about three components: the psychological component, the social component and the biological component. I would here again like to emphasize that the biomedical model would only focus on the biological aspect. The biomedical model would only focus on the biological aspect. However, when it comes to biopsychosocial model, it gives equal emphasis to all these three components of health. The biopsychosocial model says that for a person to be fully healthy and truly healthy, all these three components need to be balanced and health must be accomplished in each of these three areas. If you remember from our discussion in the previous video, we had discussed the definition of health given by World Health Organization. That definition also talks about a similar module. So, the biopsychosocial model would help you to understand that definition and that assumption in a better way. Now, let's begin with the biopsychosocial model. The model was proposed by George Engel. He published a series of research papers criticizing the biomedical model, and he stated that the biomedical model was very limited and restrictive in its nature, and hence there was a need for a more comprehensive and elaborated model. So, during the 1960s and 1980s, George Engel, he proposed several models, several research findings. He came up with several research findings, and ultimately he came up with the biopsychosocial model of health. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the model says that health is composed of multiple dimensions, and when I say multiple dimensions, those multiple dimensions here are the biological dimension, the psychological dimension, and the social dimension of your health. It came out as a criticism. It came out of the criticism of the biomedical model of health that only focused on the physical aspect of health. The biomedical model only focused on the physical aspect of health, but the biopsychosocial model took a more comprehensive view of it. George Engel, the person who conceptualized this model, he emphasized that equal importance should also be given on the social factors and psychological factors in the process of treatment, which means it, according to him, according to Engel, if you are going to your physician for a certain illness and the doctor just takes a look at the physical symptoms and gives you symptomatic treatment, that does not qualify for the definition of treatment in true sense, because according to him, for a comprehensive treatment to take place, the doctor or your physician must take into account your mental state, your emotional state, as well as the social factors going on in your current life. So, he argued that all of these things should be given equal weightage, as well as the subjective emphasis of their patients should also be taken into consideration. Another very important factor proposed by this module. When we talk about subjective experiences of the patient, it means that two people going through the same illness might feel different intensity of discomfort, might feel different intensity of symptoms. If two people are going through viral fever, say for example, one of them might be more uncomfortable with that, one of them might be experiencing severe body ache, severe headache, while for the other persons the symptoms might be different. For the other persons, the individual might be going through chills or through dizziness. So, our own individual experiences in treatment, our own subjective individual experiences in treatment differ, and equal emphasis should be given to those. We all must have heard certain cases that one treatment modality suits to some individuals while it might not suit to other individual. The same medication may or may not work equally effectively on two individuals. There might be few people who are more comfortable with consuming pills and syrups, while there might be individuals who might be more comfortable when it comes to intravenous injections or drips or treatment modalities of that sort. So, our individual body's reactivity to the modality of treatment, our individual psychological states should be taken into consideration when we are planning out treatment modality or a holistic wellness planning for an individual. Not just in physical sense, but the mental and social aspects and social and mental individual differences of the individuals should also be taken into account. Moving ahead with the individual components of the biopsychosocial model, as I mentioned, the first component is the biological model, the biological component of this model. So, the biological component is very similar to the biomedical model, and it largely emphasizes on your physiology, your anatomy, your genetics, your current physical health. So, factors like your genetic composition, brain damage, physical injury, any form of anomaly or impairment in your body, any form of hormonal imbalance in your body, fluctuations in body parameters, fluctuation in blood levels, all of those things would come under biological component and would be studied under the biological component. So, if we talk about the biological components of health, we would have to take all these things into account. The second component of health proposed by this model is the psychological component. The psychological component include features such as your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, your psychological stress, your coping mechanisms, the way you attribute and perceive things, things of that sort. So, everything related to your emotions, be it pleasant emotions, unpleasant emotions, your current mental and emotional state, how much amount of stress are you currently going through, how much coping resources do you have at your hand currently, do you have sufficient interpersonal relationships and sufficient interpersonal support or not, do you have healthy coping mechanisms or unhealthy coping mechanisms like binge watching something or smoking, drinking, alcohol consumption. Does the person has healthy coping mechanism or unhealthy coping mechanism? Your emotional state, your beliefs, do you have irrational beliefs? Are you somebody who is very rigid, very pessimistic and very deterministic in his or her belief? Are you that kind of a person? All these things would come under the psychological component. So, to sum up, psychological component largely deals with the emotional and cognitive aspects of an individual's health. The last component proposed by this model is the social component. The social component basically talks about things which are related to your interpersonal relationships, your groups, the immediate groups to which you belong, your family, your society, your culture, your country, things of that sort would come under the social component. It basically tries to understand how your family is exerting an influence on your health, how your culture is promoting certain kind of health habits or certain kind of unhealthy habits, how your society or the country where you live in or the locality you live in, how the hygienic condition or how the status of pollution in that particular country or that particular society impacting your health. That kind of things would be considered under the social component. So, your community, society, family, things of that sort would come under here. If I have to give you an example of the social component under the biopsychosocial model, we may try to understand it in terms of how the dietary pattern of a person differs from family to family. There might be a family who is very particular about the kind of food they consume, about the number of calories they consume, about the timing of the food they consume. There might be people who finish up their dinner by 7:30 in the evening, go for a walk, begin the next day with a very healthy, some healthy fruits and some yoga, meditation, things of that sort. On the other hand, there might be a family who is not very punctual about the timing of their food. They might not be very careful about eating food at regular intervals, about not eating junk food. They might not give equal emphasis to the importance of physical activity in their day-to-day routine. Such kind of family or people belonging, a child belonging to such kind of family is more prone towards developing certain kind of illnesses and disease. So, this was just an example of how your family can become a component in determining how healthy or unhealthy will you be as a person. In similar ways, our culture, our community, our society, our country, the locality where you live in, the hygiene standards of that locality, all of these things play a role in our health and illness, and that is what is discussed under the social components. So, here is a summary of the three components we have discussed. The biological component, which when a patient goes to a doctor, the biological component would study features like your age, your gender, your genetic composition, then do you have any physiological allergies, any physical anomalies, any ailment, any form of disruption within your body. Things of that sort would be studied under the biological model. The next component is the psychological component, which as we discussed includes things like your mental health, your emotional health, and the kind of beliefs and expectations you have, the kind of cognitive processes you come from, the kind of perception you have, the emotional health you have at the current moment. Things of that sort would come under the psychological model. And finally, the last component was the sociological or the social component. It is also known as the social or sociological component. It would study features of your interpersonal relationships, your social support, and socio-economic status. Along with that, it would also study the role of your family, community, culture, and society at large. So, these were the three components, three individual components under the biopsychosocial model. For a quick revision, I would like to state it again that the biopsychosocial model emerged as a criticism of the biomedical model. It is a more comprehensive and holistic approach to health. It has three components: the biological, psychological, and social components of health. Now, let us quickly take a look at how the biopsychosocial model has brought in new insights into the field of health and well-being. What are some of the major key highlights brought in by this module? The most important aspects introduced by this model were the biopsychosocial model takes an approach away from the limited biomedical model. Because why am I calling the biomedical model a limited model? Because it was only limited up to, it only used to study only the disease, the physiological symptoms, the superficial, or the findings of the tests and experiments, which whatever studies were to be done. The biomedical model only focused on that. However, the biopsychosocial model gave new perspective in the sense that it highlighted human experience. It highlighted that we should also take into consideration an individual's experience, their subjective feelings, their subjective viewpoints regarding the treatment modality. So, that was one thing that was one newness that was brought about by this module. The next point which it brought in was it advocates the system approach. The system approach was another newness given by this. What is a system? A system basically indicates any entity which has different individual components, yet those components work together to form a greater whole. Those components work in coordination to support each other and to complete a greater function, which is why we classify our body as a system, because there are different organs, different tissues, different cells, different parts of your body functioning together to make a whole. Our digestive system is another example where we use this word system. Here the digestive system again is composed of several individual organs inside your body which work together to play a role in your metabolism and in your digestive processes. So, a system is anything which has individual components, yet they are dependent on each other and they function together. They function together to achieve a greater whole. So, in the same manner, the biopsychosocial model is a system. It promotes that our body, our conceptualization of health is a system. These three components, our body, which is the biological component, our psychological component, and social component, are individual different entities, yet they interact and they work as a whole to produce a fully functioning individual. The next major point, the third major point which this model brought in was it advocates an interaction and communication between the patient and doctor. The earlier model, the biomedical model, was heavily pessimistic in the sense that only the doctor had a major say in the treatment modality or in the understanding of illness. However, the biopsychosocial model says that the patient should have equal right in trying to explain the problem to the doctor, in trying to communicate his or her subjective experiences and subjective problems to the doctor. So, it is not just the doctor who would give in a very mechanical way that the doctor will hear 5 set of symptoms and diagnose you with a certain illness, but the biopsychosocial model said that the doctor would inevitably make a list of the symptoms that you are going through. However, he or she will also take a look at what are your subjective experiences, what is the intensity with which you are going through these symptoms, what are your psychological state, what is your social state, what is your social support system, and after taking all of these things into account, he or she would give a comprehensive account of what particular illness the person is going through or what particular treatment modality can be utilized over here. So, this was a brief overview over the biopsychosocial model, which is currently the most popular and most widely utilized model of health and illness. I hope this was helpful for you. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Thank you.